Anybody reporting to any SLT, you will land here. And the very first thing you see is that this report summary is empty. Why? Because you don't have a report yet. Okay. If you opted out for Georgia DNR, this will stay empty because there's no emissions being reported. You just need to put in your threshold analysis. If you are reporting for a Georgia DNR facility, or if you are any other facility from any other SLT, these things will start changing as you create a report. So what's going on here? What happened is that we pull in, or we already have your report from last year. And we will use the data from last year to populate this year's report. That way, you don't have to start from scratch putting your information in from the very beginning. Okay? So all of this to say that even though we understand that you probably have very big facilities, some of you, the data that you had there last year will already be there. And all you have to do is edit and modify. Unless you are a brand new facility. If you're a brand new facility, you will have to start from scratch. But if you have reported in the past, I want to say 6-7 years, chances are we have a report for you. Okay, so a few things to note on this report summary screen, and really this is more about how the screens behave for everyone. Okay, so we're back to all facilities. From reporting to all SLTs, this will, from here on, this will all apply to you. First thing you see, your left-hand side menu is a bunch of links. It has a lot of information. These are your breadcrumbs. So if you want to go to a previous screen, you would click on here or here, and it'll take you back in from where you've been. I'm sorry, to where you've been, so you don't have to leave and come back. Here are some links over here. Contact CDX, that's your CDX help desk. We'll talk a little bit about, once you're in CAERS, why you'd still want to go there. Here are some resources. The user guide, the most updated version of the user guide will always live here. I have a glossary here for you. So if you don't understand terms, some of the data fields, there's a glossary in there with examples. Here's your help desk again. Here are your points of contact for your state, local, tribal authority. Okay. And they are asking that you use these POCs because if you email me or you email care@epa.gov with a question that's for your SLT, then I have to forward it to them. We just waste time. And if you think you have a bug, you still need to email them, because that way we all know what's going on, right? So if you're going to email me, I'm just going to turn around and forward the email to your SLT. So start with a help desk and then go to your SLT for help. Some of these things are about to change because some of these things are now automated, but you will have some resources here that may be useful. Okay, so we have this CBI disclaimer, and it just says if you have CBI, you shouldn't put it in here. If you think you have CBI, you need to run through whatever process your SLT has for you. Okay. We are building the breadcrumbs for this because once you're in here, sadly, you have to go back to my facilities. The presumption was that you were already stuck and you were on your way out. But once you have created your report, you would now no longer see create new report here. You would now see these buttons, and you would click continue. If you were, let's say you worked on it yesterday and you're coming back to it today, you would just click continue. So let me go ahead and move into this left side menu. So the first thing that you should do when you are in CAERS is check your facility information. So you're going to go here and here. Make sure that we have the right facility name. Make sure that if you work with this facility before, make sure you've got your ID that makes sense to you, your address, and all of these things. Okay. Here's where you begin to see how to edit in the user interface. And note that some of these are not editable depending on whether your state allows you to edit these or not. Like if I try to type something for my agency ID, it's not going to let me. But it certainly would let me change my mailing address. What you can edit in this screen will depend on which state you report to. If you find that there's an error that you can't change, but you know it's wrong, immediately contact your state, local, tribal authority so we can fix it on our end. Some of these things they can fix. Some of these things our admissions inventory team will not let the state fix either, and they have to be done by EPA. The reason you want this to happen here is because once you've certified a report, changes become hard unless we return the report to you. And so we're trying to avoid all the rework, right? So check this information before you do absolutely anything else so that we know that, and you know what's in here, and we don't have any problems. Okay. Now, some of you may or may not be allowed to change your NAICS code. But what I want to show you here is how, in general, how these screens work. So right now, it says here, I don't have a NAICS code, right? And it's going to tell me that at some point, and I'll show you in a moment, it's going to tell me that I need a NAICS code. So if you know your NAICS code, go ahead and enter it. And if your state allows you to do this, go ahead and enter it. If you go in here and your state does not allow you to add a NAICS code, you need to let them know so that they can add it for you. Okay, so here I've added as primary NAICS code that I manufacture dog and cat food. Okay, and hopefully, it looks good. Again, if it doesn't look like your NAICS code, let your SLT know. The last thing is that you can enter as many contact information here, as many contacts as you want. So right now we have one person, but you could enter multiple people. However, the system is always going to ask you to have an admissions inventory contact no matter what. Okay, so you must always have somebody there. And if you change people, you want to update that as soon as possible. So that we have the most updated information for you. Okay, so now that you've checked that all your information is good, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is run quality checks. And the reason for that is because right here, you'll be able to see if something's missing or something's not right before you start your report so that you can fix it as you go. Now, the user interface, a big benefit of the user interface is that once you're in a screen, it will not let you leave that screen unless you put the information that it is asking for, okay? However, just bear that in mind because right now there is no way for you to just leave a screen half done, right? If we imported your data the first time, surely there might be something incomplete. But once you're in that screen, it's not going to let you save until you got everything in there that you need to have. Okay, so just bear that in mind as you go. And also look at that, note that your QA checks will sort of direct you where you have to go to do different things. So running these QA checks before you start your report will give you a good sense of things that you might need to fix. There might be things that you might see a ton of errors and panic, but then realize they're all the same one, right? They're all the same error for like different units or different processes. And so once you know how to fix one of them, you'll know how to fix all of them and it'll go smoothly. So this is your QA checks. And once you're finished with your report, you will have to run the QA checks again. So just bear that in mind. It will not let you submit until you fixed all the red errors listed. On occasion, you may also see down here in blue something called warnings that are things that may not be a problem, but we want to alert you. And so you don't need to fix all of those to submit your report. Just note that your SLT will be able to see those. And so if there is something you were supposed to fix in a warning, your SLT might come back to you and say, no, you really do need to fix this. So if you have any questions about warnings, it's just better to go to your SLT and ask them. And that way nobody wastes time. Okay. Now, I don't see any questions in the chat box. But for right now, I'm going to stop for a moment and make sure that nobody has a question. And if any of my SLTs have any, anything that I need to add at this point that I might have missed, please let me know. Just raise your hand at any time. Because sometimes I forget myself. Okay. Now, let's go here. Data bulk entry. Chances are you only need to change your throughput. Maybe nothing has changed from last year but your throughput or your total emissions if you weren't using, like if you were using an emission factor and you have the same emission factor, this might be the only thing that changed. If you don't have something, if you have another calculation method here like SEMS stack test, maybe you only need to change the total emissions. You would enter that here because there's no point in you going in through all of this if all you have to do is change your, your throughput value, for example, right? So if that's what's going on, then just go to data bulk entry and change those things. Now note that there is some flexibility in the system. And if you know how to work with the system, you can actually take advantage of what the system can do for you. And so even though this training is taking a while, if you learn this really well, it can actually work to your advantage. So what are we going to do here is we're going to note a few things. In order for you to use the bulk entry, all your units processes need to already be in CAERS. All your emission factors need to have been selected, and or your calculation method needs to have been selected as well. So just bear that in mind. Once you have that, then you could go in and just change these things, right? It may be that this year you actually are only adding like 2 processes, in which case you would do that on the left-hand side as I'm about to show you. And then for all your other changes, you could just use bulk entry. So what I'm trying to say is that you could use these things at the same, together. Just make sure that you're keeping track of what you put into the system. Because once you're in here, like I said, if you don't have a unit or a process, it's not going to show up here, so you can't do anything with it. Okay. Let's start going down this menu here. Here's where we have our list of units. And I want to note something real quick here. This unit was here, it's pre-populated from last year's report. So if I try to delete it, it's going to tell me that I can't. Here's the thing, is that we don't want people just deleting stuff and relabeling it, because what's happened in the past is a lot of our facilities did that, and then they found that they had several units in their report because they never told us that what they'd done was relabel. We are working on a longer term solution, but for now, if you don't want this unit to be called V201, you will need to permanently shut it down and recreate it as whatever other unit you want it to be, whatever other ID you want it to have. Okay, so just be really careful because the system is not going to let you do this. And it is also no longer letting you do that through the bulk upload template. People were skirting that by just not putting the units that they didn't want to keep in their template. And again, all that's happening is you are getting a duplicate unit in your inventory, right? Somebody in EPA now thinks you have 2 units where you when you used to have 1. So this is really all to try and keep your facility inventory clean. And so we really ask that you help us out. If you're going to do that, if you're going to do any permanently shutting down, you would want to go in here and you would want to do the operating status here. Okay. Now I'm going to sort of explain a little bit about this so that we make sure that we're not confused, because last year I think people were confused. So your operating status is here, and really, so long as you're operating, you can enter the operating status year or not. What is the operating status year? The operating status year is not the year this unit started operating. The first year the unit started operating, yes, that would have been its operating status year. But when this operating status year changes, when your status changes. Okay, so if my unit is going to be permanently shut down, it shut down last year, then I need to put in 2021, right? So, or 2020, or whenever it shut down. Okay, same thing if it's temporarily shut down. So this unit status year is not the start year, right? It is the year that when this changed. The last time the operating status changed, that is the year that you put here. So let's say that it was temporarily shut down last year. And by last year, I mean last inventory year. Okay. So let's say that it's been closed, but in 2021, it reopened. Then I would change this to operating. Okay. And I would put the year, whatever the year of the new change was. So it could have been like 2021. However, one thing that you need to know is that your operating status and status year for your units and processes needs to be consistent. You can't say that you had a process associated to a unit where the process was operating, but the unit was not. That will give you an error. Okay. So I'm just going to put this back where it was for my demo, but just bear in mind, again, operating status year is the year when this operating status last changed. And it is not necessarily the start year of that unit. Okay. I see a question, and I will wait to answer that question in a bit, because I'd like to get through a few things first. But I see your question, so I'm not ignoring you, just so you know. Okay. So how do I enter a unit? The way I enter a unit is I just click on this plus button, and it's going to start asking me for information about the unit. I'm going to call this unit B202. And I'm going to say that it is a boiler, just for the demo. I'm going to say that it was operating, and I'm going to say that it was operating like in 2017. That's when it started, you know, it last changed status. Now I can, this unit, this description here is basically for you. So I'm going to call it boiler B. However, if you noted while I was typing, the system keeps some memory, and that could be helpful, because maybe, you know, you have several buildings and you're going to call them this, you know, your description is going to be very similar, and you just want to edit it instead of having to rewrite the whole thing. So bear in mind that there's that memory that starts accumulating, and you'll see that throughout. So chances are, once you've entered one of these, entering another one will be a little less painful if some of the data is similar. For argument's sake, I'm going to say that I have 120 horsepower. And here you're going to begin to see how the system is guiding you, right? It says If you enter this data, now you have to enter this data field. So I'm going to say it's horsepower, and I'm going to click save. Okay. If I were to not, let me just do this. If I don't enter data that I need to be entering, it will not let me save. Okay. So just be mindful, like if you're about to go to a meeting, maybe you don't want to be doing this because you're not going to be able to just click save halfway and be done. So now I have this unit. And now if I look in here, now I have these two boxes here. Before, when I started entering for data for a new unit, I only had this information that's in this box up here. Now it's telling me, hey, now you can add processes to this unit and there could be controls associated with it. For this training, we are not going to do controls and we are not going to do bulk upload. So Excel template bulk upload. So we're not going to be handling anything with controls, but I just need you to be aware that that's going to pop up. Now you know that whenever you're in a screen and you see this plus sign, it means I can add something on this screen, right? From here, I can add a process. But from here, I cannot add controls because there's no plus sign here. So it's going to, want me to go somewhere else. I say this because at some point, if you're in the middle of your report, you may get a little confused. And, we had a lady last year who thought she'd lost, a button somewhere. And she was in a panic, and then she realized that she was in the wrong screen. And that happens, right? You can get overwhelmed with all the data you're handling. And so just know that's how you know. If it's not here, chances are you have to go to another screen and enter it there. Because she was convinced we had a bug because she thought the button had been there before when it never had. I can understand her confusion because whenever you're handling a lot of data, and especially if you haven't had enough coffee or whatever, that might be you. Again, that's where calling the help desk and letting them help you, right, through this is a good idea if you're in a panic. Okay, but hopefully you will not be in a panic, but because this is really, we don't want you to be in a panic, right? We're not trying to get you in a panic. We want everybody to have enough time and breathing space to do this. Okay. I'm just going down my outline to make sure I've covered everything that I wanted to cover here. Okay. Now I am going to add a process. Similarly to the unit, I'm going to give it a name. Similarly to the unit, if I try to, delete something that was there last year, the system's not going to let me. And I'm just, for argument's sake, going to call this building B power waste oil. Okay, and this description is for you. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else but you. And you may just want to consider that if you're not always going to be the reporter, you may want this to make sense to somebody else as well. Okay, so I'm going to say because this process is associated with a unit I just created, it could have certainly started operating after 2017. If you remember that last time the status changed on the unit was 2017. But I really don't want to say that this process started operating a year before or two than what the unit started doing, right? Like that would be inconsistent. So I'm just going to match what I had, and it's going to be 2017. It could certainly have been later, but it should certainly, it cannot be earlier than the unit was created. Now, every process has a source classification code, and we want you to make sure that you get the right code. So what we ask you to do is either search your code if you already know what it is, or type something about that SEC and let us help you search that SEC. Okay, so let's see. Okay. So before I do this, let me go back and show you what happens. Let's say that I thought that this was my code. Okay, so I search this code and it finds this code for me, but this code has been retired. Okay, So the system will tell you if the code has been retired and you cannot use it. It will also tell you if a code is slated to be retired. If it is going to be retired, it will still let you use it if usually when we retire an SEC these days, we give people a year or two so they can still use the code before it's retired. And if that's what's going on, it will still let you use the code, but you'll get a message here saying that that code's about to, expire next year. You may want to just use a new one. Okay. So I just wanted to show you that it will help you find your code. Okay. And it will tell you if something's wrong. Let me just go back here. Okay. So, all right. So now that I know that I can't use that code for whatever reason, I'm going to go in and select another one. And I'm going to say that it's, for argument's sake, I don't know if this makes sense in a dog food factory, but here we go. So I've selected this one, and you see it populate the description here. Okay. This is how you know whether or not you've selected the right code. This is how your SLT will know if you selected the right code. If you have questions about things like this, your CDX help desk cannot tell you which SEC to use. That's not their area of expertise. This is where you would go to your state, local, tribal authority and confer with them to make sure that they're telling you that you get the SEC that you actually need. Okay, again, you can see this memory here showing up because I was tinkering in here yesterday. It already knows that I was going to put in 5 because I put in 5 yesterday. I'm going to put in that it's 8 hours a day. I'm going to put in that it's an average of 52 weeks per year, and that totals me 2,080 hours per period. In this case, I'm going to say that the amount of activity was distributed equally throughout the year. I want to show you here that, hold on a second. Okay, that these asterisks represent data that you absolutely have to have, okay? So this means you need to put that information in. And I also want you to see that here, this question mark is tied to the glossary. So here it will tell you what this data field is, and it's giving you the example, right? So that you know what it is. Okay. So far, so good. Now, let's go down here for a moment and talk a little bit about reporting period. It's going to ask for all this information, and this information is crucial to get your emissions calculations done. You will note this message here. If this is going to pop up if you have an SEC that is fuel-based and that SEC is on a list. Okay, that list is a list from EPA. Not all SECs will have this requirement, but many fuel SECs will. So here's what you're going to do to save yourself a little time. I've got this process. I just put it in. It's waste oil. And now it's asking me for the throughput material and fuel material. So you may be asking yourself, why is it asking me twice for something that is probably going to be the same thing? Well, bear with me and I'll show you why. We're going to select waste oil. And in the case of this SEC, the SEC is super clear that this is the fuel. So it's going to try very hard not to let you pick a fuel that's not corresponding to that SEC. Okay. And then I'm going to put in 50. And I'm going to put in 1,000 gallons, E3 1,000 gallons. This is the code for 1,000 gallons. It's also going to ask me for something called a heat content ratio, which most of you know better than me. You probably have one, but you may consult your SLT, of course, but hopefully you can see this pop up on my screen. I have the user guide up, and the user guide in Appendix C has default heat content values that you can use in this screen. Okay, we put in as many as we could find, right? And maybe for you, it is this one. Maybe you have liquid waste vegetable oil that you're getting from a bunch of restaurants in your area, so you know that it's going to be 0.125 million BTU per gallon. I'm sorry, 0.12 million BTU per gallon, waste vegetable oil. So for argument's sake, I'm going to put that in there. 0.12. It's only going to ask me for the numerator. Next year is going to ask me for the denominator because the assumption was that it was going to, the people were going to match up with their numerator. So, and sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. Now I want to, hopefully I'm not confusing you because I want to show you something else. As you saw, that heat content ratio was in million BTU per gallon. So I can do this, or I can put in 50,000 gallons, and this will pre-populate for me. Okay, it will pre-populate the average. Okay, so you can still change this if you don't think this is right, but just know that if you hit on something, it can pre-populate it for you. And so just make sure that hopefully we're saving you time. But if it's not what you want, you are certainly welcome to change that. And like I said, next year we will have the denominator in there to make it super clear what everything is. Okay, now I've already entered my fuel and I've already entered my heat content. You might be saying, well, you're going to make me enter this all over again. Well, no, that's what this button's for. If your fuel is actually your throughput, you're done, because all you do is click this button and it copies it over for you. I'm going to say these are routine, and I'm going to say that this is an input because my throughput is oil I'm using in my process. And now I save. Now I have my process. It shows up on the list of processes for this unit. And now, again, you see these new boxes have showed up. Controls, emissions, and release points. Okay, well, yay. All right. What happens if you have an emission factor not in the throughput that you want it to be in? You have an emission factor, but let's say that instead of being in units of measure of fuel, you're going to have an emission factor for your emissions that is in something else, in other units. We were asked if we could do something about that. So there is something you can do. What you can do is you can simply have this process with a different throughput. In order to do that, you would go up here, you would click on add alternative, and it's telling you, just make sure that this is what you want to do, because you're about to, quote, create a copy of this process. Now, this will not double count because you're going to be really entering different emissions for this, quote, duplicate process, okay? You also do not need to enter fuel again. You've already done that for one of the copies of the process. So you don't need to do that here. This blue thing, it's not a critical error. It's just telling you, hey, if it's the first one, you need to put your fuel in. But if you already put your fuel in the other sort of duplicate, right? In the clone, you don't need to do that again. So for argument's sake, I'm going to call this one P2021. And you, again, may call it something different. Your SLT may have, they may have a naming convention they want you to use. Some SLTs want you to match whatever your permit says. So again, questions about IDs are really questions for your SLTs. But you can see that you don't have to re-enter all of this to create this. You can now just enter the different throughput that you needed to enter. Okay. So what are the different kinds of throughputs you could use here? You could do, for example, maybe your emission factor is going to be in hours. So you could, excuse me, you could, give me 1 second. Ah. Throughput material. Equipment. So maybe your emission factor has to do with how many hours you run your process. And it has nothing to do with the fuel or whatever it is, right? Because that's what you have for an emission factor. And your SLT is okay with you using a different emission factor. So then you could do something like this and say, like, I don't know, hours, you know, depending on what your emission factor says. And you could do something like here. Sorry, hour, right? So all of this to say that this process, you can add a different throughput just so you can use an emission factor that you might have. Where appropriate, what you're, again, question for your SLT is whether or not you should do that. Now, in this case, because I'm saying that I produce pet food, I'm going to say that my emission factor, for argument's sake, has to do with the number of cans that I produce. And I'm going to say I make 30 of these, right? And for 30, that my emission factor is in cans produced. And I'm going to put in that it's in 1,000 cans. And that's going to be E3 each, okay? And that way I could use an emission factor that was something to do with the number of cans that I produce. And this is output, right? I'm producing those cans, so it would be output. And now I have my quote duplicate process. And the system will know if this is a duplicate. If it's everything's the same and you're trying to add the same pollutant to both, that's not going to work. You need to have something different in your reporting period for it to be considered a different process. So just bear that in mind. Okay. I don't know if at this point there are any questions. I don't see anybody typing questions. I know that somebody's asking about the emissions inventory threshold. So while I've paused here, so for Georgia DNR, facilities reporting to Georgia DNR to go through an opt-in process. I don't want to go back through that, but I can go back to it in the end when I'm done with this. But those thresholds show up in the application. So the first question it's going to ask you is whether you are operating or have shut down. And then if you are operating, it's going to ask you if you are above or below the thresholds. When you get to that question, the thresholds are on that screen. Okay. You can also view the thresholds, I believe, in the user guide. So download the user guide and you can see those thresholds there as well. And those thresholds change every 3 years. And if you have any more questions about that specifically for the opt-in process, we do have Georgia DNR staff. So, type your question in and we can do what we can to answer your question. Okay, so now I have created a unit and I have created a process. And now I'm going to add a pollutant, okay? So from the process screen, because I need to know which process this is associated to, I am going to add a pollutant. And I am, for argument's sake, going to say, actually, let me first add something like this, because I want to show you a different calculation method here. So I'm going to say that it's carbon monoxide. And I'm going to say that I have data for continuous emissions monitoring. And if that's what I have, and I'm making these numbers up, I'm going to say that it's like 30, and I'm going to say that I have 30 tons, right? And I'm going to save. So now I have added a pollutant to this process. I'm going to come back to this process in a moment, but what I want to show you is that now all this stuff is beginning to show up here in the data bulk entry. So remember at the very beginning, early on, I said, you can go ahead and enter your throughputs and stuff here, right? Now you can see why you need to add the unit process before you try to use a data bulk entry, because otherwise they won't show up. So now they're beginning to show up, right? And if it's new, this number is with respect to the last time you reported. So right now it's saying not applicable because these didn't exist in your previous year reports. So that's why it's showing up like that. Okay. Here you can see the emission factor that you'd be using. And here you can see that there was no emission factor because it says in future we may be publishing your quote implicit emission factor, but for right now there is none for something that doesn't call, like the calculation method doesn't call for an emission factor. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what that looks like when you do use an emission factor, because there's some nuances that I'd like you to see as well. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to add another pollutant. This time I'm going to add a PM. So I'm going to add a PM 2.5 fill. So just so you know, you can do the individuals or you can do, I believe you have to do both, but you can do the individuals as well. Whatever you choose to do here, make sure that your filterable and condensable add up to your PRI. Okay, we have lots of problems with people saying that they have more filterable or condensable than primary. That's physically not possible. So just make sure that you're doing your accounting properly. We have QA checks for some of these things, but we don't always have QA checks for every conceivable scenario. And you just don't want your SLT to come back to you with a question about that and have you reopen your report. So just be mindful of those things as you go. So yes, so Dennis is asking, if your units didn't change in 2021, yes, the moment that you hit that create new report button, all your 2020 data will be pre-populate your 2021 report. You will then be asked, obviously, to edit that report. If things look identical in last year, there is a QA check that pops up. It's a warning, but it says, hey, your data looks exactly the same as last time. Like, we don't want you doing that. But yes, you don't have to re-enter everything. You only enter what's new. So this B201 unit was here from the 2020 report. And so that got pulled into I'm sorry, B201 was in the 2020 report and got pulled into the 2021 report. So your data will your last report will pre-populate this year's report. So Dennis, you should see a 2020. So let me pause here for a second. You should see your 2020 data, or not. It doesn't have to be 2020. It's whenever you had an emissions inventory report for the last time. Okay, so I'm going to say that I have an emission factor. Now, there are several options for emission factors. You could have an emission factor from, peer-reviewed literature from the manufacturer, something like that. You could also have a specific emission factor from your SLT, and you can enter that here. We do also have borrowed emission factors from other state, local, tribal authorities in here. So if you have an SEC and you have a pollutant that matches one of the emission factors for some of our other states, and you click on this, it may show up. Having said that, you really need to ask your SLT if the use of that emission factor is appropriate for you, okay? Because it may not be. Something that applies to Minnesota may not apply to Georgia, and so you really want to have that conversation with your SLT before you submit your report. Remember, once you've certified something, it is a royal nag to have to redo things, right? So we try very hard to avoid that, and we don't always succeed. And some of you have been through that pain. So just know that we are trying, but we need you to help us as well. And I know many of you have. So I appreciate that.